here we are. Welcome back. Welcome to the end of preseason of the Doomer Optimism podcast. We decided to sit down, the three of us, and just sort of do a retrospective about, basically what have we accomplished in this podcast we are very reluctant to start. And so, was it worth it? What lessons have we learned? What are our goals for season 2 or season 1? I don't know how we're going to call it. So let's just get started by talking a little bit about our sense of what happened. We went in with an extremely open mind about what could be. And I think leaving it open to being a collective and letting people join in was really cool and very successful. So I think maybe we can start with that, just sort of how the snowball took off and how we're sort of the substrate for a memeplex, as Jason calls it. And that actually sort of the substrate took and grew something. So maybe let's start with our thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'd like to just piggyback on that, Ashley. I think probably if I were to point to one thing that was the most successful aspect of we had a dream, it translated to reality, it's that if you look at the body of work, all 15 podcasts, it's really hard to put your thumb on our politics, where we live, who is even the host of this thing, right? Because in the end, AC hosted almost as many podcasts. In fact, he hosted more podcasts than I did,
Yeah.
And so, Joe got 2 hosting positions, and so it was nice. It was really nice to kind of see people coming out of the woodwork and having really interesting conversations. Not a single episode is like any other episode. It's almost like they're little bottle episodes that just sort of dive deep into whatever that topic is. And so, yeah, I was really proud of that. I really liked, how it kind of all came together. What about you, Jason?
I agree. I think it's kind of hard to pin down, which is a good thing, especially for a preseason. Perhaps we want to be pinned down more by season 3, say. We want to have themed quarter seasons or something, as people have suggested. But the fact that we have just kind of different random people on each time, well, not all different, there's a lot of overlap, and topics that they do have some consistency, I would say, right? There's a couple episodes about kind of permaculture design, things of that nature. There's a couple episodes of just somebody building up their homestead, like Tucker Max, and getting things together. And then there's a couple of technology episodes. But it's kind of, I like the idea of having Doomer Optimism in somebody's podcast feed or YouTube feed and just not knowing what to expect next. And having the kind of diversity of people involved and topics that it can be a very inclusive place. It can be actually a collective, as we thought about it. So I'm pretty happy with how things are going.
Yeah, me too. And then I think the other thing that's really interesting to me was the act of empowering people to be involved. Anarcho-contrarian just really came out of the gates at the beginning and just started making connections with, he connected with Ben Hunt and Ben Falk, who are both pretty big names in their own spheres. And it was really cool for him to see that connection and then to invite them in, and then to also take on the role of co-host to sort of translate what are we all talking about and what are they talking about and what's the overlap. I think, I don't know, part of me thinks there's this nascent thing in just a lot of people in the world that they're basically have a doomer optimist type perspective. They just don't know it. They just don't know that they are it. And I think just trying to put a coherent message, or I guess like philosophical perspective on this idea, like, what are you doing, what are you working on, and how does that fit into this vision of, we've got to thrive despite challenges. I think is really cool. I also love the diversity and was extremely surprised by the willingness of all these people to come on. I'm still shocked by the amount the internet like allows to happen, this kind of access. This is something I think, I don't know, maybe people aren't taking enough advantage of, but I think is just a really cool aspect that I don't know. I just think like, wow, just reach out to people, and a lot of times they'll say yes. I mean, we have a couple of people who want to come on in January who we've reached out to, who are really big names, and I just think like, why are these people saying yes? It's so nice. I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I was definitely, I was really impressed. I was joking in the DMs, Ashley, that like you might have missed your calling as a talent booker. But yeah, I think that there's something like, fresh, a little bit fresh about the lens we're bringing. And maybe what's so fresh about it is simply that it's kind of a Rorschach test. Like, people imagine Doomer optimism to be whatever they want to imagine Doomer optimism to be. And we we definitely played into that this season. We definitely, tried not to limit it. There's a lot of, there's the politics is all over the place. What people do for a living is all over the place. But I think, it seems to me that we did sort of narrow one aspect of the lens. I think that like you have to kind of be aware of the all of the predicaments we're in. You have to be aware of it. And you have to be reacting to it in some way. It seems like that's kind of the crux of it. Now, how you react, what pieces of the predicaments you're most worried about are all very different, right? But everyone we interviewed, everyone who was on the show is reacting to our current predicaments with a sort of, it's more than just survivalism, right? It's an actual, like, we're trying to take advantage of the predicaments in order to create a more abundant, thriving world on the other end of this. And I just found the variety of like creativity, and like how you could almost give like the same set of the same rubric to all these different people, and they would come up with wildly different projects to be working on. I just found it to be I mentioned this on Twitter, but like I just found to be on these calls and just getting to sit here and like listen to all of these smart people talk about really cool things. It's been one of the coolest things I've been a part of in my life. And certainly this year, it was really cool to get to listen to everybody.
And it seems like it has a organic nature to it, in the sense that different people can step up, and book people can step up and say, I want to be interviewed, or I want to interview somebody else. And different people, just what happened recently, can listen to a podcast, a previous Doomer Optimism podcast, and take exception to, say, some part of it, and and that leads down a whole rabbit hole, which can lead to a whole another podcast. So one of our podcasts coming up next year is with Gregory Langlois of the Regen Network. And that came about precisely because he listened to our podcast with Eli and James. And we talked about Regen Network and quantification and legibility about regenerative finance stuff. And he took exception to the way that we portrayed it and talked about it. So we're like, all right, come on, let's dig deep into these issues. And then, it got on Twitter, and then somebody else, Josh, had very, thoughtful responses. to the whole thing. So he's going to be a co-host. And so it just feels very organic, which is nice. I like that.
Yeah, and I would just add, like, it's funny because so part of the project of this year was these mini manifestos that I don't know how I even thought to do it, but I just thought, like, I think it was funny because we were starting to get some attention from somewhat mainstream publications and, like, you know, well-known figures, and I was thinking, like, you know, before they define what it is for us, let all of us define it, which the whole project I have of doing the mini manifestos is to show that it's like the definition is extremely wide ranging, and so so that people don't think it's like just homesteading or something. It's not just homesteading at all, and that was really important to me. But then it's funny because within the mini manifestos we have literally people who are saying the opposite things, and this is their approach toward creativity, and I think it's okay that is the case. Like, you know, more or less, like, there are many manifestos I read and I'm just like, this doesn't appeal to me at all, but I'm not the arbiter of what somebody does that's creative and helps to solve the problems that we're facing. And I like that. I also think that there's, if we're maybe one thing we could do now is dig in a little bit more. We know that we're diverse. We know that we're, like, you know, not politically coherent, but I think that at the end of this season, I have a few thoughts as to what we are that I didn't know before the season. One of those thoughts is that I think that most people who are involved and have been involved, and, you know, their different ideas and different practices that they're taking part in, everybody that I know of has a sense of nuance, is not extreme in one direction or another. So we've got, like, the full-on techno utopians and the full-on Luddites, and I feel like all of our conversations were like people who could see like the counter arguments to an extreme position and to, like, integrate that. And I think if the project of Doomer Optimism is anything for me, it's like the anti-cult. I just feel like I've talked about this with Jason a ton. Like, there's just so many cults that grow out of uncertainty. In a moment of crisis, people just want, like, one all-encompassing answer that solves every problem, and then guru figures pop up, and then, like, you know, a lot of dangerous things result from that. And I think if this were a space that were, like, you know, the anti-cult, where we're able to discuss things with nuance and to not straw man each other and to not, you know, I can have Gregory on. I have strong feelings about legibility and, like, panopticon, etc., and authoritarianism as a result of legibility, but I'm still cheering on his efforts and want to know more about them. So I think there's I don't know, I just don't know very many places like that where we can disagree but also cheer each other on. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that it's just that the extreme uncertainty, right, is that, like, you know, in order to at least, you know, it almost seems like the most bare bones criteria for considering yourself a Doomer Optimism is an awareness of how screwed we all are, right? And that uncertainty, you know, the future is just like, and the funny thing is that this is the way it's always been, right? None of us know when we're going to die. None of us know what the future holds, but past generations at least had some sense of the trajectory of things. But I feel like if you're a Doomer optimist, then you're looking at the future and just saying, it's just like white noise. I have no idea what happens 3 months out, right? And that uncertainty, right, sitting with that uncertainty can yield a million different versions of the future. And I think that, like, sitting with that uncertainty, I think actually enables you to be more nuanced, allows you to be, like, you know, our fundamental lens in a way is uncertainty. And so anyone who's too certain about the way the future is going to go is almost immediately, I almost immediately distrust them, because I'm like,
right,
you have not thought deeply enough about this if you're that certain about the way the future is going to go, right? And that seems to be, enables us to have much more nuanced conversations. We can have certainties about certain things, right? I would say that a strain that seems to run through most Doomer optimists is a certainty that the global food system is screwed, right? Like as a whole, most of us think that, right? Even the techno utopians think that, right? I actually find the focus on food to be kind of like this emerging strain for at least this first iteration of Doomer optimists, is no matter what your lens, many of us are trying to fix the food system, whether it's through a techno-utopian model, a homesteading model. It doesn't really matter what your ultimate lens is, but like that's a problem many of us have landed on as something that like needs to be fixed. But I think like, yeah, if you're too certain, you just haven't thought deeply enough about it. And I think that uncertainty leads to nuance, because we're all kind of deep down a little bit insecure, and so we're sort of like, well, I'm not going to foreclose on anything, because if my goal is survival and thriving and abundance, then I don't want to just foreclose on some future possibility by being, a arrogant asshat now,
Right. And I'm not I want to let Jason go, but I'm not like a crypto person at all. But I've just tried to remain agnostic about it. Like, okay, maybe we'll see, we'll see. And I don't want to be like some asshole who forecloses that conversation completely just because I'm like Luddite leaning.
Yeah, well, in the spirit of nuance, I would say that we have not interviewed any techno-utopians. I think we've interviewed techno-optimists. Techno-utopian, I would say, somebody I quote tweeted a few days ago, Venkatesh Rao, who was very upset that we're not in outer space yet. We haven't invented time travel. We're not producing babies from artificial wombs. We haven't extended life expectancy past 200 years. That's techno-utopian. I don't think we've interviewed yet. I think, and I'm just saying that because I think techno-optimists or kind of techno-enablers, I don't know what they would, how they would identify, would say that. And likewise, I don't think we've interviewed any true Luddites yet, simply because of the fact that we've had interviews over the internet. If we were true Luddites, we wouldn't be on Twitter. We wouldn't be having video conversations. So just for the sake of nuance, just putting those out there, it's all somewhere in between.
Well, okay, hold that thought, Jason, if you can. I wonder if the Luddite and techno-utopian are in that certainty end of things.
Yeah. And I was going to say that too.
By virtue of that, cannot be Doomer optimists. They have determined a future that is not, that seems, I don't know, they're too certain, basically. They're not searching anymore.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, and I honestly think like probably what draws us all together, or what has really like drawn me to all of you guys and everybody who's been involved is the skepticism toward utopianism in general, like just utopian projects that think that they know in advance, and again, foreclosing all other options. This is the way forward. And I think, yeah, I think fundamentally utopianism engenders cult-like thinking. It just is like so much certainty, so much one vision. And so, if the two extremes are like, tech and anti-tech utopians, we basically just don't really engage those people at those extremes, because it's not really part of the project. If the project is figuring out a way through that's open, then that's not that, because, they're just like dead set on Mars or dead set on no more electricity. And it's, and I just feel like some electricity would be good. Or like maybe some techno future, but on Earth would be better. Just there's more nuanced things. So anyways, Jason, you had more to say.
Yeah, sorry about cutting you off, Jason.
No, I didn't have much more to say. Perhaps one descriptor of the people that we've interviewed are roughly in what you would call the regeneration scene. Regeneration, some people are, point out that that's a very vague term. I think it's kind of like strategically vague, but it generally refers to kind of mostly earth focused based. It's focused on ecological regeneration, and it's also thought of in terms culturally of we need to revive communities again, bring back sense of meaning, sense of purpose in people's lives. And so I think that's a pretty commonality, whether they see that as being more tech enabled or not. So that's all I would add there. Perhaps one thing we get into is early on, we talked about this distinction between practice and theory. And I think, we might have said like, okay, maybe like 3/4 practice, 1/4 theory. I think I said that at one point, or half and half. I don't know. What do you all think about kind of our more theoretical episodes and our more applied episodes? Were our practice applied episodes, were they practical enough? Did they get into the weeds enough? Were they kind of theory practice?
Mm.
I'm not sure. I don't think we can listen to any of our episodes and say, okay, now, I know how I would set up permaculture design, right? Or I know how I would do some, set up a water system. So we're not getting into the details of like building techniques. We're kind of talking about some of the larger theoretical issues around the pragmatic stuff. Maybe the closest we got was Ben Falk. But even I think our one with Dow
Orion, yeah.
Dow Orion, I'd say when I was listening to that, I was like, this is kind of a theoretical episode. For the most part. So I'm just curious what you all think.
I personally feel like, we're playing around with the medium of podcasts. In general, podcasts are like highly theoretical, nerdy guys talking to each other typically. And so I think taking that as the medium we have to work with at the moment, I think it's okay to more or less provide a survey of the theoretical approaches out there to practice, if that makes sense. So like, when we're talking to Dow Orion, it's like her approach to permaculture is basically non-ideological, except the degraded ecological world we've inherited, and work with it, and don't think of everything that's a species ecosystem like pre whatever date you want to determine as an invasive species. Maybe an invasive species can be good or useful. So that is an actual approach to practical things that sort of represents a way in which to engage with the world. I think Josh's episode is similar. His approach to tinkering, like on the homestead kind of thing. I think thinking back to William Wheelwright's episode, which hasn't yet come out, but will, his approach to community building, Trace was listening in, thinking like, I'm trying hard to like make a little community, but I don't think people really appreciate it much yet. So I think having people sort of talk through those like experiences and their approach toward the practical, I would love to see some way in which we get this more hands-on. I don't know how that is, besides keeping, to integrating Twitter where people can show things that they're doing more and have that be a part of the conversation that's just on a different platform. But I don't know. Trace, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that that's probably, I would say I think that overall it was about 95% theory and about 5% practical in reality. And I think that's fine. I mean, I think part of it is, this was a skunk works for us, right? Like we're just gonna play around with the medium and see what happens. Like, partly like, does anyone want this, right? Like, this is an amateur production. We're all taking time out of our lives to do this. And so the number one question we were asking, I think, or what I was asking was, is this worth my time? And I think that the answer is a resounding yes, right? It was very fulfilling personally. And also clearly there is a market need for this. So like, let's keep doing it. Is it worth my time to get professional equipment? I'm not sure about that yet, right? But like, it's definitely worth doing a season 2. I think I was a little bit disappointed with the lack of practicality. I have a friend who is, kind of, he's kind of in the system, right? He's struggled with mental illness. He's, struggling against that sort of tyrannical system that so many of us are worried that already exists for some Americans. And he listened to it, and the first thing he texted me, he said, "Trace, we need to talk about this podcast. It doesn't speak to me at all. It has no practical, he's like, it's basically just a bunch of academics wanking off, and I was like, fair point, fair point. I think that that definitely, there's that strain. It definitely is. However, to your point, Ashley, I'm not sure, unless we're going to be like, all right, today we're going to talk to Ben Falk about taking care of blueberry bushes,
right.
A whole episode about blueberry bushes, and we could absolutely, like, if we're going to look at like having like a Patreon, like where people can pay for subscriber content, we absolutely could have like this whole like extremely practical stuff where we're just going to dive into the weeds about some very specific topic. I just think we were like, hey, let's just talk about the cosmology of Doomer Optimism this year. There's no way. I mean, we're talking about like, 100,000 foot level on so much of this stuff. There's no way to dial in, which is where I think the Substack comes in, Ashley. I think the Substack could be our opportunity. If we know we're going in, for instance, one of the people I'm absolutely interviewing next season is my friend Puya Dianat, right? Who has started this co-working space, I'll say co-working loosely, called Create ATL. It's an incredible project he's working on. I would like to get into the weeds about that. There's only so much I can on an hour and a half podcast, right? But he can then maybe write an article for the Substack where he's getting much more in the weeds, or we could have a little bit more planning when we're going into a specific interview to see if there might be some kind of practical nugget we know we can tease out of that person, I think that
I have sorry, you go ahead.
Oh no, go Ashley. Yeah.
I have a counterpoint to the getting into the weeds suggestion, which is, and this is going to sound like very bootstraps of me, but like, part of my perspective is like, okay, so I want people to know what's possible, that people have succeeded practically, but in order for them to succeed practically, they have to do it. Like they have to do it. And this is like, I don't know, this is like against my whole sociology and recognizing that like structures limit you and whatever. But, I think I've had this conversation with Josh before when I'm doing this homestead incubator class. And we had this long conversation about like, what can you teach people about homesteading? You can teach them a set of heuristics. You can teach them an approach, like a philosophical way to think about the land. But you cannot give them like pigs in a box with an owner's manual. It just doesn't work like that. That's not how the world works now. It's not automated, it's diverse, it's not standardized, and neither should anyone's approach to optimism. One's approach to optimism should be extremely unique to them. And so, and I think the way that one finds their approach is through praxis. So I think, like, I don't know, to me, it's cool to show what's possible, even on a practical level, like, what's your co-working space? How does that work? And then people are like, oh my gosh, that makes me think of my community, but I would do it differently in my community, and here's why. And the only way that they figure it out in their community is by doing it. Yeah. So I don't know, I just think, like, there's a tension there that's, you can't, it's part of my critique of making everything legible. Not everything can be legible. A lot of the practical stuff can't be. A lot of the in-person stuff can't be. Either you go and visit someone and talk to them long form, like, you know, I visited Jason's house and, like, understand his whole approach and land so much better for having done that. And then you do it yourself, and, you know, and then you figure it out and share back. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I think there's a space in between what you're talking about, Ashley, of, like, you know, you just can't have full legibility unless you're on site, and more of a theoretical discussion or even heuristic. So, I mean, I'm just thinking of various podcasts, which I think do a pretty good job at this. So there's, like, for example, a podcast called No-Till Podcast. And every guest is a different no-till market gardener. So it's very specific. I mean, in order for this to work, he has to focus in very specifically no-till market gardening, right? And
yeah.
In every episode, he asks them, okay, every stage of the process, how do you do it? You know, how do you take care of the paths in between your rows? You know, how do you flip crops when you harvest one crop, put in another one? What machinery do you use? It gets really into the details there. Another one I'm thinking about is, like, the Survival Podcast with Jack Spirko, and he has episodes. I mean, he's a polymath, but he has episodes, like, on all kinds of topics. But when he does have an episode on a topic, he gets pretty in depth, right? Like, he'll have an episode about, you know, aquaponics. You know, this is how I set up my aquaponic system. You know, this is how I raise ducks. You know, this is how I did cover crops or whatever. And, you know, another one I'm thinking about, and these are all suggestions for the audience, by the way. They're all great podcasts. Regenerative Agriculture Podcast, and every one of those is he talks to a regenerative agriculture farmer, like a kind of a larger scale, usually people who switch from conventional to regenerative ag, and gets into the details. And so I think there is this kind of opportunity to kind of weave in and out, right? To bring people on who gets into the level, you know, who's, you know, somebody who excels in a very specific area, and really get into the weeds. You know, it's not going to be the same as being there, but I think that there is something where you can ask them, you know, you can kind of make a little more legible every kind of step of the process, you know, yeah. Whatever it is. And I don't think we've gotten there yet, and I think we could. Of course, that requires zooming in, and there's a million things you can zoom in on. And so
yeah,
I still think we should keep, you know, some of our episodes that are, you know, a little higher up, more integrative, bigger picture things. But I do think that there are examples of where we can move a little bit more into the direction of pragmatism.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I would like to see us move toward is people who are doing things, right? And focus on the things that they're doing and how they got there. One podcast, I'll throw out my own, that I've always really liked is How I Built This. Because, you know, I've listened to a lot of business I'm kind of a business nerd. Like, I love, like, learning about business models and, like, how they came up with it, right? And most business podcasts or entrepreneur podcasts are a little bit more like prosperity gospel. Like, we're going to talk to someone and they're going to talk about this magic that happened around them, which is fun to talk about. But what I always liked about How I Built This is that they go deep. It's like, how did you screw up? What was year one like? What was the first 6 months like? Which are the things that, like, big entrepreneurs tend to not want to talk about, because it's actually demystifying. Like, it actually kind of, you know, demythologizing, right? Like, it kind of, like, makes them look human. But I've always been fascinated by that part, is like, I know what it was. I know because the story of like how being popular is the same for everybody virtually, right? What's different is like that first 6 months. What was your first
Yep.
failure like? What was this like? And so maybe having episodes like that, where we can take someone with a lot of experience and then actually like walk them through their story, make them recount for us how they got to where they're at now and what are mistakes they made.
Yes. I
And
love this because, I think the trajectory of our culture in general is to hide the mistakes and play up the successes. And this is like the whole social media culture too, is like cottagecore. And we've had this conversation on this podcast too, like cottagecore shows like, the green and blue eggs, but it doesn't show like the shitty bedding you have to move out of the coop after however many days or weeks you clean out your bedding.
That's fun. I enjoy that part because I'm like, oh, this is compost. This is great.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and this is the other thing, like compost is often shit or like rotting material. So like, you're okay, we're talking about like cyclical waste cycles and you can like talk, regeneration or whatever, but like, I don't know, it could be really cool to be a place where people talk about like the gross, difficult challenges, mistakes, because the thing I heard over and over talking to people who are going to be involved in this homesteading class, people who are advanced boss level homesteaders, is that they were like, I want to tell people what mistakes to avoid. Like I started down so many paths that were a complete waste of time and led to so much heartache. Tristan Roberts, who's one of the homestead mentors for the class, has been homesteading for 15 years. And like in our call to get to know one another, he's talking about how he had a homestead related divorce. Like it was just too stressful. I tried to do too many things. It was too much of a strain on my family. And I want so badly to help other people avoid that. And so I think part of what we're doing, or maybe we could do more of, a lot of the people who are involved here are like early adopters on this like adoption and diffusion curve, and they've made all the mistakes for the people who come later, so it would be nice to have that as like a recurring part of our conversation, like not like Dow Orion started this approach to permaculture by being involved in like restoration projects where they just like threw chemicals all over everything, and she was like, this is horrible, I don't want to be involved in this. And so like talking about the standard approach, the mistakes we've made, like I have so many lessons just in our move to Uruguay about like we got into our house and had no running water or electricity for a while, like our slow and confused approach to getting to be productive, like all the different mistakes. I put the gray water garden way too close to the house. Like these kinds of mistakes, I think, to center mistakes would be a radical thing in this era.
Well, it's certainly a way of making sense of such a wide lens, is that like it's going to be very hard to like go 10-foot level on all these different things because I mean I'm on a suburban plot focusing on urban urban regeneration. There's going to be very little that other especially people in rural contexts can be talking about very locally that is going to have much applicability to me, right? And vice versa. But if we're talking about the mistakes, so then it's like, okay, you do this is what you do, this is your project. Let's talk about how complex this was, how difficult it was, where you made mistakes, how would you help someone coming behind you to avoid the landmines. It gives us a lens, it gives us something to focus on that is much more, because like you were saying, Ashley, like in the end, you got to just do it. And you're going to make your own mistakes, and you may repeat the mistakes others have made. But and I saw this in business, right? I got my MBA, They taught you how to run a business in theory, and then you still have to go start your own business and fail spectacularly, right? You still have to go do that in order to better understand how to run a business as you go along, right? There's no substitute for just running a business, just getting your hands dirty, right? And so I think it probably is much more practical to be like, okay, we could talk about all the ways you can be successful in all these different lanes, but let's talk about the ways you were not successful, and that'll give us somewhere to focus on. That would be highly applicable to a lot of different people.
Yeah, you know what it makes me think of? This Anna Karenina quote, "All happy families are alike, and every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way." It's like all success stories are alike. The failures are all different. The failures are what teach us something interesting.
Yeah. I'd be curious to see also if there's like opposing things, where like, one person would say, this is my biggest failure. Another person would be like, well, I did it this way and it worked out just fine for me. And then trying to pick apart why it was successful for one person, a failure for someone else. I suspect with homesteading or just agriculture in general, there's probably a lot of there's the best practice, and then there's someone who completely broke all the rules, but it worked for them, and trying to identify how or why it worked for that person.
Yeah, and my whole approach is is there a this is going to sound horrible, but is there a lazier way to do this? Is there a way? I mean, is the thinking underlying this sound? Do I really need to do all this, or can, I don't know, it's the Pareto principle in me, can I do 20% of this to get 80% of the results? And I don't know, I just you have to, when you're this person in this world where there's just so many things to navigate, and you're a parent, and you have all these other things, your work and life. I think at least that's been my approach. I don't know. Jason, do you have anything else on this point? Otherwise, I have a separate question.
I was thinking we could call this the Doomed Project, but still optimistic about life podcast.
Yeah, that's pithy.
Yeah, very. Yeah, I think we could definitely, in our minds, say when we're interviewing a homesteader, make sure to ask those kinds of questions. I don't know if having, half of our episodes be like, "How did you fail?" I don't know if I would do a podcast like that. The failure would be part of the larger picture.
Yeah. The way I was conceptualizing it is it's a question we make sure.
Yeah. Right. If one of the three of us, now that we're talking about it, are doing an interview, but we don't want to put too many words in the mouth of somebody else who wants to step up and be part of the collective and do interviews too.
Yeah, the other thing I would just say is that even there's a lot of people experimenting with tech and startup and business and different institutional structures, and there's lots of conversations about intentional communities, and can we do cooperatives, and all of that is experimentation that requires that will have failure as a part of it. And I think it not just homesteading, but thinking of Eli's project, what's working well, what's not working well. And all the tech stuff, a lot of the tech stuff is just pure experimentation. Let's just see if this works, let's find out. The crypto stuff, all of that is extremely nascent, and I think it's unclear where it's going to go, and there are a lot of failed experiments happening right now, so it's worth talking about that. Okay, so the question I was going to ask is, maybe we should go through and say a moment in the season that surprised us, or we really, really liked, or we were excited about the potential of it. And not just the podcast, but maybe the Substack, or maybe just our interactions with people on Twitter. If I were to start to give you guys a chance to think, I would say it's just so funny that just having a term to define ourselves, even though we're playfully holding the term and not trying to be so dogmatic or about what it is or to define it. Just having a term makes it easy for people to resonate with the ideas. And just that tension to me was really cool, because it was like, I'm here thinking like, ha ha ha, Doomer optimism, whatever, like it's not even real kind of thing. But then it's just becoming more real. And like this Unheard is this magazine, this publication, and it's popular in the UK. And writer Eris Rusinos is using Doomer optimism or Doomer optimists as like a thing to refer to. That was a really like that. And then Tucker Max too, just like, he's got a big following, and he's using like, the Doomer optimists, as if we're a real thing. And I also partially credit Joe Norman for, like, even though he makes fun of labels, he just like had the respect to just call us Doomer optimists, like, and treat the word and the term seriously. And I think that like is a cue for other people. So anyways, that was really cool for me. And I think the lesson for me is to just lean into it, like, use the term, be fine with it being a term that we're like adjacent to, while still being, I don't know, kind of playful with it. But I don't know, I just got really excited in the midst of this, like this thing that we kind of just allowed to emerge is like becoming a thing that people take seriously.
Yeah, I think things that I found most interesting were when somebody who has a certain persona surprises you in some way, or so for example, the interview with Tucker Max, he's talking about his psychedelic therapy, that I don't think everybody would have expected that. When we were interviewing Eli and James, halfway through, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy that you guys are like hippies as well as technophiles. And, maybe I'm warming up on tech now. And, the fact that you were, open to that and willing to admit that was pretty cool. Those are just a couple of examples. I could probably think of more, but when something unexpected about a person comes out, either in the conversation, like you just didn't know about them, or through the conversation, like there's some emergent aspect to the conversation that leads into an interesting direction.
Yeah, I would add as an example to that, and then you go, Trace, is William Wheelwright's conversation. He's got this like a perspective that's like pretty reactionary on Twitter. And then when we get into the conversation, he's just like extremely thoughtful and nuanced, and we share so many values. And he's like, he says stuff on Twitter to like get a rise out of people. But then like in the course of the conversation, I'm like, wow, like you have such a thoughtful approach to this that I feel like I don't know who could even argue against it. Like part of his approach was just like, I think we should have lives that are oriented towards beauty and like meaning and connection. It's like, how could you be against that? So I don't know, it's kind of sweet.
Yeah, I think that, the sort of punk rock aesthetic, is that it's sort of like, you get one pass at this, right? Because I'm not editing it. Like, so, unless you say something really outlandish, it's staying, it's staying in the cut. So
we haven't edited anything yet, have we?
No, I haven't edited a single thing. So, whether it's, me accidentally getting drunk while we're recording, or,
that was inspired, by the way.
Or whether it's, Tucker, like being like, I have to pee, like this has gone on too long, I gotta pee, like, I feel like, in a way that's sort of like, that's sort of something I would like to keep. Like, I kind of feel like it's become sort of the DNA of it, is that I don't want to lose that. Even if we up the production value a little bit, I don't want to lose that, because I think that there is something special, especially as we get more, I don't know, popular or more like well-known people on the podcast, giving them an opportunity to sort of like be like, no, this is you unfiltered, this is who you are. Can you keep your persona together for 90 minutes? Where is the crack going to happen? I think there's something special in that, and trying to make it like a safe space to let your guard down a little bit and have a real conversation about what your life is like and what your work is like. I think we definitely had some real moments like that on the podcast this year, and I think that's special. For me, hands down, the biggest moment was on the parenting episode. It was really it was really emotional for me. I really enjoyed that, recording that episode. I enjoyed the conversation.
That's coming out soon, right?
It is coming out soon. Yeah, I would like to have, I honestly think we could have an episode about parenting every season. There's so many aspects to this, I think we could, if we could get some people that were willing to be honest about it, I think we could have episodes around marriage, right? And about keeping because that's a big part of the logistics of what we're doing, is keeping your marriage together, keeping your kids sane, keeping your family together, just the logistics of running a family, which is the core unit of what we're talking about. And then how does that integrate with the community and the wider world? If we're looking for people to start to talk about their warts, right? Like let's start talking about family and what's going on inside your four walls. That's where you can start talking about practical, questions about how we're all managing the insanity of these times we live in.
I think on that, sorry, go ahead.
No, go Ashley.
I was just going to say, I think on that topic, it would be cool. I know a lot of moms who are like super engaged in the problems of raising kids in this world. And it would be cool, I think, to have maybe a mini focus of the next season to talk to people like Happy Holistic Homestead, Roxanne Ahern, or Chelsea Norman about like the approach to parenthood and motherhood and being a wife, and not that it should only be women, but it would be nice, because I think in general the podcast sphere is dominated by a lot of men and a lot of like professional or work oriented perspectives, and not as much or individual perspectives, like how am I working on myself, how am I like slonking and lifting weights and this kind of stuff, but that interdependent level, at the level of the family, I think there's not nearly enough conversation about like navigating these most important relationships in the midst of the world we live in, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking like the big things: birth, marriage, parenting, death. Like we could have whole episodes just discussing those things through this lens, if we have a lens, just like how are we navigating these very fundamental human things at a time that modernity really just likes to shave that off. It's the messy parts of life. It doesn't have a solution for it, which I find I find it very interesting, that like that's what religion religion, if it served any purpose, it was to help give meaning and structure around these really key things that virtually everyone was going to go through. We're all going to be born, most of us are going to get married, most of us are going to have kids, and we're all going to die, right? So how do we like handle these human things? And modernity came in and it said, okay, well, we're going to handle everything except for the most fundamental human things. There's not really a solution for them, or really like a common.
Well, it pretends to have solutions for them.
Sure, but mostly it's just sweeping it under the rug, right?
Or subcontracting it to institutions like hospitals.
Yeah. And in many respects, the project of modernity is to just sand off the rough edges, to be like, well, we're going to handle death by having this like doctor, just kind of look at you and describe it in very, scientific terms. And I think that, there's a yearning for the messiness, which is getting back to something you said earlier today, actually, about how in some respects, Doomer optimism is accepting the messiness and trying to come up with a way of incorporating the messiness. Compost is a perfect example, right? A deeply necessary additive to the system, right? But it's gross, it's disgusting. It is all the gross stuff in a pile, right? That yields the gold that makes it all work, right?
Yeah.
And life, I don't know if there's anything I'm coming to as I get older, it's that like life is kind of like, it is trying to find meaning in the messiness, because that is life, like John Lennon said, what is it? Life is what happens when you're busy making other plans, and it's sort of like, let's talk about that messiness more, and really kind of, we were just saying failure, but maybe the failure isn't it. Maybe it's just talking about the messiness, how we're all handling the messiness of this all with this like looming thing in front of all of us, all of these different calamities in front, making the messiness maybe more poignant or urgent.
Yeah, and I think there is something to sharing about the messiness so that other people don't feel alone, or like their experience of the messiness is some failure on their part. But instead, like, the embracing of it is as like, this is what life is. The amount of shit involved in parenting and homesteading is part of the deal and normal. Like, just, that's just, you're gonna have to deal with that. So just having some perspective, like, this is okay, this is and the way it should be, is, I think, could be pretty radical.
Yeah.
Okay, so last words, last thoughts. We talked a lot about our vision for the podcast, what was good, what we liked the most. Any other big picture thoughts about, or like, meta thoughts about, what it is, what it could be?
A couple of things. I don't know if I want to go down any of these tracks, but potential. I mean, one is core tensions that we saw arise, like kind of like axes of tension. So, we've already mentioned like kind of like more the tech enabled versus the tech minimalist. I don't know if we've gotten into like urban rural explicitly in the podcast, but that's one. We've talked about legibility versus kind of larger scale coordination, and there's a tension there, and that's been kind of on my mind a lot lately. I'm curious if any of you have either identified kind of these kind of core tensions that have come out, or you think that need to be explored more. I mean, I think another one is kind of like the Instagram cottagecore stuff versus the messy, failures. That could be another tension. I'm curious if you all can think of any others.
The one that keeps coming to my mind is like, I keep thinking of Neil Clark saying the podcast, spelled with an E at the end. It's a certain class of people who get invited and talk on these sorts of things. And part of my critique of the legibility crypto vision for the future is who gets to be involved. Like, who are the people who are getting paid in crypto? Like, is it my neighbors? Certainly not. My Uruguayan small scale farmers, is certainly not. So not that we can be all things to all people, or maybe that people who are not part of the quote unquote podcast would even want to come on. I don't know. But I think, to me, there is a class element and like a cultural element that I'd like to at least address, and have people, excuse me, who represent maybe dissenting or like not similar perspectives to come on.
Yeah, I can definitely see I would love to get Neil on the podcast if we could ever get him on, because I think that is a core tension of the gentrifiers, the old localists versus the new localists, I think that would be a really
Yes,
rich
totally.
yeah.
Yeah, I would like, I would like to talk. So I would like one of the things I'd like to come from this podcast is getting theoretical enemies to realize that we're all on the same side, right? Is that I think that there is, Twitter really enables this, even among localists and bioregionalists, like this kind of talking incessantly about national and international politics, which are just reifying the theoretical lines. But I personally have a very strong conviction that the kind of abolish and defund the police kind of urban lens and the anti-government rural lens actually have way more in common with one another than they have dissenting opinions. But there is that kind of, I look at like racism as a sort of, it's a national lens. Like it's actually like anti-localist, right? The idea is that I'm going to judge someone based on this bias I have that is not rooted in your humanity, in the person I'm looking at, right? So I actually think like anyway, I think there's a lot of like these kind of like the Democrats versus Republicans, these types of national lenses are actually just pitting us against each other, when really it's much, I think that kind of localist, bioregionalist kind of, we need to have our communities, we need to rebuild our communities, we need to not be constantly harried by these large structures that are just, dehumanizing us. I think that is the lens that a lot of us are coming from, and we're just like being split off by these kind of, I'm not going to say that they're not silly, they're very real differences of opinion, but I think that like we could actually have some real conversations around, I think that, the urban and rural divide especially is something that is complete bullshit. That both sides need each other. I'm consistently, as an urbanite, I'm consistently like frustrated by the rural communities just writing off of the spaces that have been like the repositories of all of our wealth for 2 centuries. Like the people, the steel, the aluminum, all of the resources you're going to need to build the future are sitting in our urban centers. They cannot be written off. You can't escape it. You can't avoid it. Our fates are tied together. So how can we like kind of start to bridge that gap? I'd love to see, I don't want to see arguments. I don't want to see people yelling at each other or getting frustrated, but I'd love to see if we can find some commonalities and start to like make at least frenemies, of these kind of differing perspectives, because we really do all need each other. There is nowhere you cannot escape the problems of the urban core or the future with climate change, ecological devastation. You can't escape those. You can't go far enough into this country to escape those. They're coming for you. That you're tied to it. If San Francisco or the urban cores become the hellholes you imagine them to be, those people are going to be leaving. And that's exactly the type of thing that Neil Clark is talking about, right? Is that New York City became very difficult to manage. 300,000 people have left the city. Where did they go? They went to your community. Like you can't get far enough to escape it. You're going to have to contend with these things. And we're largely in this together. And I'd like to really interrogate that more in season 2.
Yep. And have like a nice model for like, okay, maybe we're not going to agree. There's going to be a clash of cultures, but is there a way forward that's positive that we can model by just having the conversation? I also think this ties into the conversation we've been having lately on Twitter about left versus right as like becoming less and less meaningful categories. They're just like projections that people put their ideas onto and maybe aren't even really like that much tied to reality or like real people. And Jason and I had this conversation where there's just like there's this new terms, upwingers and downwingers. Is that what it was, Jason? Where it's like, people who are, looking toward the stars and Mars and, I guess up centralized and technology, whereas, people looking towards the earth and toward, the grounded local reality. Either way, I think it's worth interrogating those like tensions, but in a way that's like human to human, not like some theoretical straw man, but, like me and Gregory probably have disagreements, and or maybe we just don't understand each other enough with enough nuance. And that could be what the conversation is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I love this idea of provoking reactions through various conversations, and then using that as almost like an automatic talent booking mechanism where
it's just like, hey, you have a reaction, you need to come on.
Right. I mean, you have a, not any old reaction, but a pretty well thought out reaction, then let's get you on. Let's integrate this. Yeah.
All right. So who wants to end out the episode for us with our takeaway point?
Maybe we could talk about who we've already have in mind to come on. We've booked that. Should we give any teasers of what episodes are coming out? Will be coming out in like the next month or two. I know, Tress, you talked about your friend Puya.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one. What other episodes?
We have Gregory we talked about, and then we also have Jordan Hall, who's very tech oriented, coming on, and that he'll be interviewed by Joe Norman and Josh Helling. So that'll be really cool, because I just think I think both Joe and Josh have an openness to tech, but a strong skepticism. And I think both of them also have the ability to ask pointed questions about, like, I think with a lot of the tech conversations, maybe we're just out of our element. We let the tech people talk and we don't really know what they're talking about because they're using language or terms we don't understand, or talking about processes we don't understand. But both of them seem to understand those processes well enough to ask good questions. So I'm excited about that episode.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, if you thought we were a homesteading podcast, well, we basically have like the three we just mentioned are all tech. They're all going to be tech, future kind of, upwingers, if you will, kind of mentality. So, if you thought we somehow were pigeonholing ourselves this season, well, just wait till season 2. We're going to blow your mind again.
So speaking of having people on who react to the podcast, somebody found me through the podcast. They're not even on Twitter. And he's a new homesteader who lives about an hour away. And we've already visited each other's places. And it's pretty amazing. He's been homesteading as long as me, about 2 years. And they have just like tons of animals. They haven't developed their kind of, their kind of plant crops as much yet, but goats, pigs, donkeys, sheep, ducks, chickens, quail, all kinds. And I'm going to get him and perhaps his wife as well on the podcast. There will be one strong homestead related podcast coming up.
And you know what, now that you say that, I just met somebody who just moved here to Uruguay, who's named Matt Smith, and his wife Jane Lou. They just bought a ranch, and they are also just like happen to be friends with Tucker. So it's just a small, very small world, but it would be cool to have an interview with them. They're just getting started. What's their perspective? And maybe we could talk a little bit about, this our particular trajectory, doing all of this in a new country.
I wonder what you guys think about maybe like a few live episodes where we do like, we're going to do homesteader Q&A and get like a panel of smart people who can come on and ask questions, or like a crypto and DAO Q&A, you know, so people can like be like, I am deeply confused about this, you know, get some smart people who can ask some questions about, you know, and kind of like, you know, 101 in a way, to discuss some of these overarching topics.
I like that. I like that idea. Kind of like the Stoa, you know, where anyone people can come on and there's like an audience kind of thing. I like that. Speaking of these DAOs, it's the thing that keeps coming in my head, and I just want to say it out loud. There's this episode of Portlandia where a guy is going to an open house for a real estate listing, and he goes in there and he says like, hey, can I do an Airbnb with this property? And the people who are selling it are like, yeah, I guess. And he's like, what is an Airbnb? And it just reminds me of us, like our approach to a DAO is like, can we do a Doomer Optimism DAO? It's like, sure. Like, well, what is a DAO?
Right.
We don't really know what it is. It's just like every new thing that comes about, we're like, can we do this? Can we do all this stuff too? So it would be cool, I think, to like, you know, have that conversation and be like the rubes out loud rubes who don't know things. I think that's cool. I can play that part fine. Okay, so what's the anything else that we want to preview for next season?
Not for me.
Yeah, I think we've mentioned the one with Gregory, and we'll be talking about regenerative finance, which is, you know, seems to be growing very quickly. I know Ashley has a lot of skepticisms. I have some. I think you all are a little bit closer to each other than perhaps you think you are. So that'll be an interesting conversation to have. I think Gregory has thought through a lot of these issues that we're talking about. You know, perhaps more than we think. So I think that will be a really fun conversation. And you know, I think it'll be pertinent in the sense as well of, you know, one tension is this kind of locality, like cosmopolitan element and local element. And, you know, if we're going to coordinate with each other and support each other, you know, what's the best way to do that doesn't undermine kind of local sovereignty and integrity, but, you know, maximizes the diffusion of broad-scale diffusion of innovation and ideas and mutual aid. I think that's a really, I don't know, to me, that's a fundamental tension that I look forward to getting into in that conversation. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, the one takeaway I would leave everybody with is that in order to be a Doomer optimist, you have to, and we can just cut it off there.
No, you can't go out there. You gotta see this egg salad. This made us egg salad.
Oh, you have to.